Okay, so today we're going to be talking about Python. So this is the first lesson in Python. The very first lesson in this series was an introduction to computer programming. So we're going to talk about Python a little bit. Now, the history of Python is that it was designed by the man that you see to the left here, Guido van Rossum, in the late 1980s. The first published release was in early 1991, so he worked on it in the late 80s and then published it or gave it to the public in 1991. It's not named after a snake, but it's actually named after a show that Guido was watching during the time that he was creating it, called Monty Python, which is an old British comedy group. And we're going to be using Python 3, so that's kind of important because for people who are in the know, Python, it looks a little bit different than the second version of Python, or Python 2. Okay, why are we going to use Python? Well, Python is designed to be readable and intuitive. It's designed to act very similar or as close as possible to our English language. So it's easier to read the programs in that situation, and it's more intuitive to write the programs. Because it's so simple, people who are not expert programmers can use it. Now, because of this, people have been using Python as a basis for programming objects like the Arduino and Raspberry Pis, which are kind of exciting pieces of hardware that have come out in the last few years. People have designed extra programs for Python called libraries that other people can use. So these little these little programs that people can add on to Python in order to increase the functionality of Python. So you can add on libraries that maybe help you graph three-dimensionally, or that help you draw. There's a module that has a little turtle in it that helps you understand how to give the turtle drawing instructions in order to draw certain things with it. So our very first thing that we're going to study, and you have notes for this, so make sure to take notes as you're going through this, is we're going to talk about the print function in Python. It's the simplest function that Python has. Now, the input looks something like this. So if you'll see, it says, print 45, print hello world, and print true. So you'll notice that the print, this is in blue, and the program that I use uses highlighting to indicate the keywords. And print is a keyword in Python. It's recognized by the program to mean something, okay? And these are actually three different data types, and we're going to talk about data types a little bit later on in the video. But the output looks something like this, okay? So it displays, and this stuff on the top, this is just from the program that I use, a browser program that I use to run Python. So it displays hello 45, hello world, and true. Okay. So when I try to look at input, when I give you input and output screens, my question is always, what is the relationship between the things that you see in the input and the things that you see in the output? So here, what you'll notice is that 45 comes out. So print and the parentheses don't come out, and 45 comes out. Similarly, hello world comes out, but the print, the parentheses, and the quotation marks do not. And finally, print true, only true comes out. And you'll notice that this series of words seems to have quotation marks and is in green, and this word right here is in blue, and there's a reason for that. Okay, and we're going to talk about that when we talk about data types. So what does the print function do in Python? It's fairly simple. It just makes things display. Okay, the print function is not really for the computer so much. Like, it will save these variables, and we're going to talk about variables in a second. It will save them. It doesn't need to display. Display is for the user. Okay, it tells me, well, I know, what's happening here. Print 45, it shows me 45. That's for me to see. Okay. All right, let's talk about variables. This is another simple thing in Python here. Python is a very easy. Variables is something that we're going to talk about in all computer programming languages, but in Python in particular, it's very easy to declare a variable. All right, you just give it a name, you give it an equal to symbol, and you give it a value. All right, so there are three parts to the statement. There is the name, marbles, there's an equal to symbol, and a value. So at this point, you should be taking, this is part of your notes right here, so make sure you write down this example. Okay. Now, rules for variable names. There's a few rules. So on the left-hand side here, where it says marbles, you can't name it certain things. So let's go over those for a second. Variable names can contain letters, numbers, and underscores, and that's it. They cannot start with a number. So they can have numbers in it, but it can't be the first symbol in the variable name. Okay, and it can't contain spaces. This is just for variable names. This doesn't include the stuff on the right side of the variable statement. So on the left side of the variable statement, you can't have spaces. So what people will frequently do is they'll use an underscore, and that's this little symbol right here. Notice it hits at the very bottom of the text here. So that's an underscore. It's not a dash. A dash would hit in the middle here. Okay, so you can use an underscore to show separation of names. That's what people frequently do in Python for variable names. And finally, you can't use keywords. And we touched upon this a little bit, what a keyword was, but let's go over this a little bit more. And I know I'm going relatively fast, but make sure that you pause the video occasionally if you need to take notes with this. Okay, keywords in any programming language are words that are reserved just by the language for programmatic purposes, meaning they mean something to the language. And each programming language has keywords. And Python has several, and they don't share the same keywords. Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Okay, but Python, these are some of the keywords in Python, not all of them. Print is a keyword; it means something to Python. True and false, if you capitalize the F and the T, those are a data type, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. So these are keywords. You cannot use them to start to be a variable name. Notice though, you can use a lowercase f here to be false, lowercase true, and that's not a keyword. Else and globe are two other examples of keywords here. Okay, so here's your first check for understanding. And what I want you to do here is pause the video and answer this question on your own. There's space on your notes to do this, and then come back. Okay, so hopefully you have thought about this is a check for understanding for what we just talked about with variable names, and you've come up with, now there's multiple answers here. So which of the following is an incorrect variable name? Well, A is incorrect because it uses a dash and not an underscore. B is correct, so you should not have chosen B. C is correct because it's letters, numbers, and underscores. And D is an incorrect variable name because it starts with a number. Okay, so the answers here are A and D because those are both incorrect variable names. Okay, moving on. You have this chart in your notes, so you need to pause the video right now and start to fill in what you see, and then I'll see you back in a couple of minutes. All right, so let's talk about these values here. These are all the values that can be on the right side of the data, the variable statement. So for string, a string is what we call, the data type of string is frequently referred to as what we mean as like text or words. Sometimes numbers can be in there, but it's essentially anything that I would say. Okay, so strings have quotations around them. They're indicated by quotations around them. So hello world and yellow are strings. Also, if I put quotes around a number, like quote 45, that number would actually be recognized as like essentially text to the programming language. Okay, so it wouldn't be recognized, it wouldn't it would no longer be a number, it would be seen as like text. An int. Okay, an int is short for integer, right? Those are the whole numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so on. 0, and the opposites of the whole numbers, like -1, -2, and so on. So essentially any number without a decimal. Okay, a float is a number with a decimal, and what I want you to note here is that 6.0, essentially mathematically it's the same as 6, but to a programming language it's not. If it has a decimal, it's given, it's actually a float, the type is float. If it doesn't have a decimal like 6, then it's given as an int, or it's recognized as an int. And finally, we have a Boolean. A Boolean only takes on two values. It's true or false. What you need to note is that the T and the F both need to be uppercase in this situation. Okay, one last thing that I want to talk about is the way that variables can be reassigned in Python. So here in the first line of code here, I've declared a variable. Its name is x, and its value is an integer. It's 8. Okay. In the second line, I've declared I declared the same variable. I say x is equal to 10. All right. Now, the problem here is that I've used the same name. So x is the name of the first variable, x is the name of the second variable. So what this actually ends up doing is when I print x, it's going to give me back the value of 10. Because essentially what happens is if you call its name again and you give it another value, it's only going to remember the most recent value of that variable because it can't hold two values at once. A computer program can't do that. Okay, so you say x is 8, it's like, cool, I'm fine, x is 8, great, it's an int, it's 8. And then you say x is 10, and what it does is like, all right, 8's out the window, okay, I got it, now x is 10, all right? And since a program is read from top to bottom, it's going to read the most recent value of 10. So it's going to print out, what it's going to display is 10. It's no longer going to think about 8. All right, so here's another check for understanding, so pause the video and I'll see you back in a couple minutes. Okay, so here, the variable that correctly stores a string value is going to be just C, all right? The problem with A is it doesn't have quotes around it, all right? The name is fine, equal to symbol, great. Everything on left of where I'm pointing right now is perfectly fine. It doesn't have quotes though. Now B is perfectly fine as a variable, except it's just not a string, it's an int. And the same with D. D, perfectly fine. You could run this in your program. It would have no errors in here. But the thing is, it's not a string. It's a float, okay? Okay, so here's another one, and I'll see you back in a couple of minutes. Okay, which variable incorrectly stores an int value? All right, so let's look at the first one, and you'll notice here that it's just, there's going to be actually more than one here. Okay, so integer equals 67, perfectly fine. I have a name that's acceptable, I have an equal to symbol, and I have an integer. B is not fine because it is, we start with a number, though the right-hand side is fine. C is okay because it's letters, numbers, underscores, and it has an int value on the right side. And D is not okay because although it's okay for a variable, it's a float, it's not an int. So the only one that would ever throw an error here is B, because you can't name it like this. D is fine, it's just not a integer value, okay? And C and A are actually the correct storage of integer values. So what you should have answered are B and D. Okay, finally, this is the final check for understanding. This asks you about reassignment, all right? So I'll see you back in a couple of minutes. Okay, so for this check for understanding asks for the output after running this code. So you have banana equals 97 plus 134 in line 1, bananas equals 100 minus 45 in line 2, 3 says bananas equals 8. So after each line, the program stores it in a different way. So after line 1, bananas equals essentially 231, right? That's the sum of 97 and 134. After line 2, it's stored as 55 because it keeps reassigning. It throws out the old value and it puts in the new value. Okay. After line 3, it throws out 55 and it gives to it 8. So at the end of line 4, I say print bananas. What ends up happening is it ends up printing 8 here. All right. Now, what I want you to note here is that it doesn't print the word bananas because bananas is a variable. All right. So if I wanted to print out the word bananas and not the value of the variable bananas, what I would do is I'd put quotations around bananas to make it a string. And then it would be like, okay, you just want to print the string bananas, all right? You don't want to print the value of the variable that's stored in the variable named bananas, all right? So you can, when you say print, you can do two things. You can print directly, you can print a string, a number, any of the data types. Or you could ask it to print the value of a variable by calling the name of the variable, right? And that's it. That's the end of the lesson for today.